It's normal. No, it's actually normal here this time of year to have several days that are, rarely get above 10, but that's Minnesota. That's not New York.
Yeah, I was going to complain, and then I realized who I was going to talk to. Talking to. I was like, okay, I'm going to find out how
We're
hell
talking to a poor,
actually.
Wayward Californian stuck in the Siberia of the.
Yeah, exactly. It is the Siberia of America, barely connected by interstate systems, right? You tried to sell it to Canada, and they said, no, thank you.
You can get on 75 and head all the way down to Florida from here.
Right. 75 was where I grew up, right off the 75 interstate exchange in Pasco County.
You have a cold, huh?
I have a throat issue. Is it awful? Can you?
No, I think it's not. I can tell because I talk to you frequently enough, but
yeah, it's been ongoing.
Oh, really? Like just one of those things that won't go away?
Will not go away. I keep re-aggravating it.
So you grew up in Florida?
I did.
I knew that. I think we talked about that. So it's real. Then you must be really suffering right now. I was in Florida last week, actually.
Did you? What were you doing in Florida?
I went to St. Petersburg for like a sort of a little art trip. Did some. Checked out some of the murals, went to a couple of the museums, spent a day on the beach, and then it was just like a quick personal.
There's no reason for it at all, but the Salvador Dali Museum is there. It's like my favorite place ever on earth.
You mean there's no reason why it's there?
Yes, no reason why it's there.
It's because the people,
what's her name?
It's because the collectors lived there. His big supporters, they lived there. That's why I think it's there. I'd
always heard that it was a mistake.
Museum.
Oh my God, I love it so much.
I've never been there before. I was totally not, and not that I'm not a fan of Dali, but he's not like an artist that I've really spent a lot of time researching or anything like that. And I actually was so impressed and saw so many of his works I'd never seen. And you know what they had there, which was total trip, is they had this virtual reality thing where you sat in this chair and put on the AR glasses, the big things. And you basically went into one of his paintings. I've never done anything like that. And it was really cool. It was like 3 minutes of exploring, you could kind of control where you went by pointing this beam of light. And I don't remember the name of the painting, but it's the one where there's like these kind of like towers in the across this desert, and there's a boy holding a hand of a man, his father or something, and the father has a hat on, and they're looking at these towers across this desert. And so in the augmented reality, you were standing next to them, and then you could get closer and closer and closer until you were in one of the towers. And it was really interesting.
That was virtual reality?
Yeah, virtual reality. Yeah, it was like one of those kind of, they sit you in a chair and you're look like an idiot lifting your head all around and stuff, but you're so immersed in it, you're just like, wow, this is amazing. And then I talked to a couple of people after, and they had totally different experiences because they went a different way. They pointed their thing in a different direction.
Like an open world video game.
Basically. Yeah, I know. I see why people get addicted to it, but it's also terrifying.
I watched the coolest thing, Star Trek Enterprise, Discovery, whichever the new one is, had a little clip, and they were showing a book being played, like an audiobook or a movie, and how it kind of just engulfed like this whole portion of the bridge. It's interesting what you can do with light, right? I mean, that's all that movies are, is light being bended in a different way, and virtual reality is bending light to your eyes. What better appeasement, right? You're trying to appease something. You're trying to trick your senses into thinking it's real.
It's totally, it's really a trick. It's quite a trick, and I think it's
immersive,
fascinating, and dangerous and delightful all at once, like all good things are, right? A little bit scary.
And I wanted to talk to you about death. I mean, I realize that we talk about death a lot, right? And every single conversation that we talk about this aspect of humanity's demise.
Oh yeah. Well, I think because I have such a foothold in the sort of the world of the paranormal that, it tends to bleed into whatever conversation we have. So it'll somehow end up we'll be talking about the afterlife at some point during our.
I mean, you could say. I mean, if you talk about, I think I've asked you this before. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but when you talk about the paranormal, you are agreeing that there is an afterlife.
I think you have to say
Right.
that there's an afterlife, because you're saying there's life after death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And whether
As you
you
die, you
agree
have a
on
ghost. It's an
right, and
afterlife.
whether you agree on what that is. And I was thinking about it actually this morning. I was took my dog for a walk, and I was thinking about all the different, and I'm not a great scholar of every culture out there, but all cultures sort of have a idea of the afterlife.
Yeah, an answer for it, right? Because it's ultimately, don't they? Everybody's considering this the question that haunts them, because they do see it more in the past, right? You're going to be in the cave and you're going to watch people die all the time. 50,000 years ago, even 100 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that can be sort of the beginning of a lot of. I mean, I think that in many ways is kind of a tipping point for humanity and creativity, and was the acknowledgement of mortality,
the greatest sorrow. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's the greatest.
Right, the first time a father held the lifeless body of his son after a great hunt or something, and realized they weren't coming back, or a mother called for her child and they didn't return. Like, those are the kind of things that started.
Even more primal, right? You're in that fight for your life. You're trying to defend yourself from death. You know what you're doing. Your body is not letting you die.
Right.
You're fighting with all your might. This thing is haunting you. If you don't fight, you'll not be here anymore, right?
And I was actually just having this conversation with a friend of mine, and so as sometimes comes up, morbid things come up, and we were talking about.
Is it morbid? Is it bad? That's morbid is a bad word, isn't it? You don't want to be morbid.
Not in my world.
I mean, polite society, when you say the word morbid, though, you're basically telling the person, I don't appreciate what you're saying.
Well, we were talking about drowning, and sort of a couple of instances in this area in the past, because I haven't lived here that long. So drowning and incidents in lakes and rivers and things like that. And, because as a Californian, I still haven't quite wrapped my mind around the fact that you can drive a car onto a lake in the middle of the winter here. It's like, I haven't quite been able to accept that fully. And where I grew up, we had two big bodies of water. We had the Pacific Ocean, and we had this wild river that ran through the part of California where I lived most of my life. And so those two things are like very moving and breathing and fast running and threatening. And not that lakes aren't teeming with life, but there's still, there's Lake Superior, or some of the Great Lakes are a bit of
like them. They're stinky, right? They smell bad. They're kind of slimy too.
The smaller ones are more.
I don't like
but like
them.
a place like Lake Superior isn't like Lake Superior is essentially an inland ocean. I mean, it's got its own tides, and it's.
I grew up on the what's it called? The Gulf of Mexico. It's disgusting too. Even the Atlantic Ocean is disgusting. I will tell you one thing. I swam in the Atlantic Ocean over here on Coney Island not 20 years ago, and I felt like I swam in sewage. I mean, just felt disgusted with myself. I got sick right afterward. I fell in. It was January 1st.
Oh.
Yeah.
You've been falling a lot lately. I think you need to be.
That was 20 years ago, Varla. 20 years ago. I remained upright. I just pulled a muscle on my back. I don't know what I did. I'm recovered though. I ran 5 miles the other day.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
Successfully, very slowly, but I successfly ran it. So I was very happy. But we're talking
about drowning, and so I was having this conversation, and it was that idea of like, I think this kind of table topic, for lack of a better term, comes up a lot. Like, okay, you're in this fire and you get out, but you can't get, one of your children out, and this was the scenario we were talking about with like this drowning that had occurred where like the dad got out, and the mom got out, but they couldn't get the toddler out. And I was just thinking, I said I would just not get out if that were
You
the
would just
case.
die. You would suicide.
And he said, you know, the thing is, you think that, but in those situations, your body and your survival instinct often takes over. And it's later that you think about the things you could have done. And that's sort of what drives people crazy. And this actually totally segued into my thoughts over the last couple of days, just thinking, I mean, by preparing for this conversation, I just did a lot of thinking, right?
So
Mostly just thinking, not too much
that's what
thinking.
I ask you to do. I
just
ask you
about
just
that.
don't do anything else. Just think about the subject for several days.
It's that idea of, you know, your own, when faced with your own immortality. And this also feeds our, you know, this kind of the fear of the unknown, the fear of things like ghosts or things that go bump in the night. It's rarely, and I think we've discussed this before, because I don't know if you've had too many paranormal encounters where
never had any.
So the ones that I've had aren't super dramatic. They've always been sort of simple, short encounters where, you know, something's pressing down on the foot of the bed, or something's tapping on the head, or something manifested at the foot of my bed when I was a child, or things like that. Now, I've had them all my life. So to me, they don't, I forget that, you know, not everybody has these kinds of experiences, but I find by and large that when people are talking about ghost stories or even looking for that good scare, it's the thought and the sort of the thought afterwards about what it could have been or what it was. Because when something like that happens, it's just like, you know, you're in a situation, you're walking down the street in the city and you encounter this sort of, you know, raving lunatic.
Yeah.
In that moment, you just go into sort of like, okay, how can I logically get out of this situation? How can I maybe you're having discourse with someone waiting for the bus, and then you discover that they're really quite mad. And you are waiting for the bus, and you're just, okay, so we're gonna.
Anyway, it could happen. You're like right there at the whim of chaos, right?
You are. And
fate
the thing
around you. Like the verb death could happen at any time.
And
then you go to the noun, right? You go to the noun called death, right? Which is what? The void.
Well, I think I was just going to say that you, at any given point, and even with something where you're seeing something or feeling something that doesn't make sense, it's from the afterlife or from the paranormal. That's sort of that swirling world of chaos, but you are sort of like the eye of the storm, because you're facing it and you're dealing with it, and your logical mind is saying to you, there's no way that something invisible just sat down on the edge of the bed and held onto your foot.
You tell me that, I'm like, I'm automatically trying to find a different way for that to be feasible.
I think everybody, skeptic and believer alike, in that moment, that's
always wants to talk themselves out of it.
Yes.
It's not possible. I mean, but mathematically, let's debate truth. How can it be true? No, that's not what I wanted to say. While you were telling it to me, I thought to myself, it doesn't matter what excuses you come up with. This person believes this happened to them, and there's no way you can take that away. One of the things I'm most jealous about, a Christian person or whatever, Christian, why I even said specifically that, but any religious person.
Yeah, we're always bashing the Christians.
But yeah, I don't care. Deeply religious person, I'm a little bit jealous of the fact they can just let a lot of stuff that I think is common sense just go. You know what I mean? And to accept their ultimate tenet or whatever.
I do know exactly what you mean. There's a comfort in that giving it up to God.
Yeah, but you believe it. So since you believe, that's such a fucking powerful word, that believe, I have nothing I can say to persuade you otherwise. And for me, that's really powerful. As long as you believe with a capital B. You know what I mean?
I think for myself, and certainly for people that I know and have talked with and interviewed and had long conversations with about the afterlife and the paranormal and their own unexplained experiences, it's obviously there are people at all extremes, but I find by and large that people within the paranormal community aren't necessarily sure of anything. They know they had some kind of experience. They know they can't explain it. There's nothing logical that they can apply to it. Perhaps it's happened to them more than once, but they don't have an explanation for what it is. You can consult an intuitive psychic, or you can consult a person who might say they have the answers, but really you don't. You can know within yourself, for example, I have a friend who passed away, and on the night she died, I smelled her perfume. And I'll never forget that, because I was miles and miles away from her.
Did
And
you
I
know she
knew
was
she
sick
had died.
and dying?
I did know that I
did.
already knew she was dead. And that night I woke up, like 3 a.m, and the room was filled with the smell of her perfume, and then it went away.
So fucking interesting.
So
It's really interesting, right?
But what does that mean? Does that mean she was, on her path, on her passage from, one world to the next, and in the process dropped me a note, gave me a little postcard, basically a scented postcard.
Just wanted to check you out.
Yeah, just wanted to let me know, hey.
Need to think like that. I mean, honestly, getting into it, what does that make you feel good, or is that you're able to do that when you die? Right? That you personally, as your journey, your humanity will one day cease. And there'll be a lot of unsaid things. I mean, as a writer, there'll be a manuscript at least on your desk that you wish you had put a little bit more effort into or something. But one day it'll be, that's it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you hope that there's an opportunity to do something like that and say goodbye to loved ones.
I have probably more than like the fear of my own death and things left unsaid are the things of, other people passing, and those things.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Not yours, theirs. So you would regret not saying it to say somebody that you care about before they die.
Yes. When I'm dead, I'd like to think I could come back and sort of freak my sisters out or something. That would be great. But
have you ever had an experience like that with somebody really close to you died and you had some kind of pact? I'm thinking Houdini here.
So my mom and I have a pact, actually. She is alive and will be alive, I'm sure, for at least another 20 years.
Good.
But we have a pact. We have a couple of things that we've talked about that we would see as signs. Because I said, when you're, and my mom is the biggest influence on the kind of approach I have toward the paranormal, the occult, the afterlife, the world that I have now written about numerous times and that I've really kind of immersed myself in. She was a scholar of many different she was raised Catholic, scholar of many different religious and spiritual pursuits, definitely did a lot of occult reading, and especially in the 60s and the 70s when it was becoming very mainstream to have, there's like all the paper, they all were in pulp paperback, these like books on the tarot and astrology, and all this stuff became very commonplace. And she's a student of the Kabbalah and has been for many years. She said it's very difficult to really understand, and so she's been studying it for like 30 years. And that's a really interesting structure because that has the tree of life and this whole kind of process that you go through spiritually that's a little bit more like reincarnation than it is just a quick, move the stone aside and I'll pass into the afterlife.
You really can. Buddhist monks, I think of them, the guys who just basically meditate all the time right into death. They'll build like ceramics around them and they'll just die. I'm like, there are many unique perspectives on this transition. I mean, it is a verb. It's a transition from living to something completely not the same thing. Whatever it is that makes us animated and makes me look forward to talking to you and enjoy the conversation that we're having ceases to do anything when whatever this is goes away. A fire Is it like a candle being snuffed out?
Is
I mean,
it, or
so
does it become part of something greater and a more collective, something more collective?
I'm sure
So
you're educated enough to know
that's
science and things that don't disappear in science. It becomes something else. There's always a transition, right?
right. And
Or is the
you have
transition
sort
just
of
husk?
like that, those, it's like that the full circle where on the very extreme end of science and what we have discovered or what we've discovered we don't know in science, sort of like that quantum physics end, and
Yeah.
then the very, very extreme end of maybe somebody who's follower of a new age movement that thinks that quantum physics is the way off the planet, or whatever it is, the way to communicate with aliens or whatever it is. There's these extremes,
Well,
but there's
quantum physics is a great example too, right? Because we're talking about balance. We're talking about gravity. We're talking about things that line up perfectly because they can't do anything else. But there's an opposite and
yeah, they
equal
just are.
reaction. They
They
are
just
because
are,
they
right?
can't be anything else. They can't.
And
Boom, they're done. They're
we
stuck.
struggle just to even figure out what that R is,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't know what our R is. So we're just going to keep poking all of these different things until we get a reaction inside
Are we
that
a
tells us
fungus?
this is the right way to go.
Are
Or
we a fungus on the underside of the toilet bowl of the Milky Way, just accidentally clinging here, going, "Yay!" for a little while. We'll be wiped
it's
out. It's
funny
happened
you
before.
mentioned that, because I actually had in mind just even the exploration of space is a pursuit into the afterlife in its own way. Because here we are sending things out that we know in our lifetime they will not reach their or this, in the lifetime of the scientists who built it, it won't reach its destination and it won't get any message back to Earth or whatever. For
Yeah, man, you're not getting that
this,
satellite back that's in the Cuniper Belt right now, are you? It's gone
it's
forever.
gone forever.
It's
And
gone forever.
so it's kind of this interesting, like it's a pursuit of something, and it's a pursuit of maybe, is it the afterlife, is it life after death, is it life beyond, is
Yeah,
it
it's
some
really
answer?
interesting. It's so fascinating because I mean, even I don't even know if you're going in this direction, but the guys who built that thing in the Cuniper Belt are potentially all dead now. I
Right.
mean, their life's work is still out there bleeping away,
And
sending
what is
information back
that,
to us.
right? And what is that? Is that the
How is that?
same thing that drives a writer
Oh
to
my God, that is so
compose a
fascinating. You
poem
just
or their
tickled all types
memoirs?
of parts of my body. My God, there's a thing out there connected to human beings that are dead, that will eventually never live, but will continue to operate. And we talk about, remember that movie, what was it, with Johnny Depp, that he like, oh, maybe you probably didn't see. I picture you just watching only good stuff. So this is a horrible, horrible movie.
Well,
This
if it
dude
had
was
Johnny Depp in it, I did
yeah,
have my face. So
okay. He got dumped into a computer, his personality or whatever, and then he tried to take over the world. No spoilers. And died.
what was it called?
I have no freaking clue. Johnny Depp does a bad movie in between pirate movies.
Yeah, probably.
Part two. I don't know.
In between blockbusters. It's the
With,
shitty
with
one.
yeah.
Um,
But anyway, I
no,
mean,
no,
it's
that's
a
totally
thing, and
true.
it's actually happened. I mean, those people put their math into that machine. They put
Yep.
a little bit of their consciousness and soul into that thing. I mean, then we have to know what is us. Whatever happens after the veil closes, right? And we have just whatever's on the other side to look forward to. We have to leave something behind. And Shakespeare left a crap ton like that too. I mean, this artificial.
Yeah, and is it the same thing that drives the scientists to continue to calculate? Is it not the same thing that drives the poet to write the words, or is it this sort of quest for an immortality in the face of the inevitable death?
As a writer, you understand that the sentence isn't a sentence. The sentence, you know what I mean? If you got a mistake, so I mean, at the end of the day, died, he didn't leave what we have something completely brand new. So we have a template, right, for evolution,
Mm-hmm.
just like your parents left in you and your son. You leave this thing that's going to constantly get changed, not for the
Right.
better. There have been
Constantly
horror,
mutated, adapted, yeah, like a
destroyed,
large lump
wiped
of
out.
clay, just
Sometimes it
molded,
doesn't work.
destroyed,
Thinking
fired,
about like
cracked,
go
all of those things. Yeah.
100 years ago, what, in December, I think, or was it this year? We celebrated like the centennial anniversary of the last day of World War I, like over what, million people died, soldiers or whatnot. I mean, there's so much death. And then afterward, right now, families were suffering from the Spanish flu and just dying left and right. People were experiencing so much death just 100 years ago. How much change after World War
Yes.
II?
Yes, and I don't know that if we talked about this in the past, but one of the things in my most recent book that I talk about and I think about a lot is the spiritualist movement, which took place from like 1840-ish to about 1930s, where it was really kind of at its peak during the late Victorian era, especially in the United States and other parts of the world, mostly the United States and the UK. That the spiritualist movement is essentially not just the belief that there's life after death, because lots of people have believed that and tried to make contact. It was the idea that not only was there life after death, but it was something that the dead had messages for us, and those messages could be conveyed to us through the proper channels, i.e. a medium and a spirit board, and that those messages could help guide us in our daily pursuits as the living. And it was, and possibly paint a picture of what the afterlife was like.
I was just going to say something specifically about that. If what we are is just a fraction of what it can be, isn't it kind of stupid to think that we're going to get something from them that's going to explain anything in a simplistic medium at all? If it's coming in fragments, I mean, we're not getting anything if there's anything out there to get.
Now you can look at it as okay, it does it, and when you look at it historically, it can seem like sort of a naive belief. But at the same time, you had it was basically took hold post-Civil War, when there was a massive amount of death and a lot of loss. Every household was missing a family member or had a family member who had been maimed. The survivor rate was not that high.
Couldn't you say? I mean, I know you're talking about specifically one movement, though, but I bet you would know for sure that this would be an evolution of something similar, because at that time in the 19th century and even before, ending in 1940s, I mean, that was really the last real violent conflict. Now, I guess we're killing millions of people nowadays too. We just kill people all the time like this.
But this was, but this is that sort of brutality of hand-to-hand combat and war, and that because of the mass amount of loss and grief, it led people to, in many cases, almost desperately try and seek a message, an answer. And so I think because of that, you had this big spike in it. And of course, you had charlatans and people taking advantage of others throughout this process. But what it did is it sort of brought that question from this something that, monks or scholars contemplated into every household.
You say monk, tickled too. Let me ask you this: who is the best? I love it. Monks just tickle me all over the place. I don't know why. Now I want to write a story about a monk on a satellite.
Yeah, I want to read that story.
Actually, I just wrote a story about a Lenape medicine man who dies and has to fix things while he's dead.
Oh, cool.
God damn it! What was I going to say? What were you just saying that I interrupted?
Well, we were talking about sort of the rise of this movement, but also this obsession with death.
Exactly.
Post
What's the greatest answer you've heard? Obviously, you're looking, so you're reading. What is the greatest answer that you've heard people compile?
What do you mean by answer? Like what someone said?
So I listen to a crap ton of NDE experiences. I podcast and YouTube. I like to listen to people's supposed near-death experience, afterlife experiences, or whatever. So that to me is like the nicest answer. What to you would be the greatest answer that's coming back from the other side, i.e., mediums or whatnot?
I mean, I don't know. Answer. I think there's been a lot of interesting messages. and a
Well,
lot of
those are
different.
the answers, right? Those are the ones that are kind of
Okay,
trickling through.
so
They might
I
not be the
thought
full
about this.
correct answer, but they're some part of it. They're a part of the puzzle that we're trying to work out,
Right.
either internally or, you know, whatever. If it's externally, great. But I mean, most likely it's internally. But
so I guess I'll just say, like, my dream afterlife would be
well, yeah, I guess that's the answer I'm looking for. But
essentially it
where
would
did that?
be something more along the lines of how, you know, Latina cultures see the afterlife, that the dead do come back and visit, but they also have this whole other world, and they get to like drink and smoke and listen to music and dance and have this kind of flip side life without the care and worries that you have in a daily life. And so it's freeing and beautiful. To me, that's the answer I've liked the most, that the sort of the Dia de los Muertos and those kind of that connection between the dead and the living, and that celebration is just this little snapshot of this greater belief system of what happens in the afterlife. But I feel that it's so
limited,
subjective,
though,
right? It's so subjective. All of those answers from all of those psychics, all during the spiritualist movement. Yes, some widow may have gotten comfort.
Right?
And
they're going
remember,
to gear it to a Catholic. If you're a medium and you're talking to a Catholic, you're not going to tell them that the Jews are right.
You're right.
You know
you're going to gear it toward exactly.
You're going to tell them the Catholics are. You know what? I picture St. Pete's by the pearly gates, and he's going to open up his book because he's on his rock. He's in Rome. You know, they built Rome and heaven. They're going to make it exactly to your comfort zone, if they're at all.
Well, isn't that the idea of heaven or nirvana? And we even throw that term around on a daily basis. Oh, this coffee is heaven. It's the idea that it's pleasing to us. So what's pleasing to me is not necessarily going to be the same thing, but there might be a couple of sections of the, you know, great mansion that we could share because we would like the same things there.
Somebody else's great mansion. That's such a control thing, isn't it? Hey, come enjoy my paradise. You can live forever on a cloud. You don't want to live on a cloud. Where'd you come up with a cloud at? That's your fantasy? No, that's Bob, the Reverend's fantasy that he threw at you. And if you give him tithe, or what is it called, tithing? If you tithe every month or whatever, you can get into his heaven. But if you really think about it, heaven should be what you make. And if you're capable of thinking beyond that pale, right? If you die and you're able to consciously exist somehow, let's say you pop like in a black hole, what are you going to make for yourself? Is it going to be the Mexican Day of the Dead paradise with all your relatives hanging out? Because I wouldn't want to hang out with my fucking relatives. I guarantee I would run. I would be hell. That would, the good place.
Like in that scenario, it's the best of whatever it could be. So whatever, your hopes or ideas about it,
right?
It's like a collection of your good deeds minus all the bad stuff.
Everything, right? Because you can get stuck in hell. Because I like the idea of being haunted, because there are some people that deserve to be haunted for eternity.
Yes, and I like the idea of being able to haunt.
Yeah.
I definitely
not give it up, right? There's so many answers I want. I want to see so many things. It would be so nice. Not only I like the idea of a life review. Here's an opportunity to see every moment in your life
flashing before your eyes.
Right? I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And I like to add to that you can control the events too and rewrite them, because all these doubts that you have in your mind, you're like, oh, damn it, I wish I had tried. Maybe you go ahead in your life review, try that and see how it works out for a life. I mean, you're not actually living it, but you get to have
that sounds like a story to me right there. Like a wonderful premise for a story. You take this special pill and you could probably rewrite your life events, but you have to wait until you die to find out.
Always add that element to these people in these stories that die, is that they actually can kind of pick this perfect ending. But at the end, it really doesn't matter, because the most disappointing thing is that you're dying. I mean, you can't hold on to the life you lived, no matter how great or how bad it was. You might want to die, you might not want to die, but at the end of the day, you're losing it all. Like leaves in the wind. Does not matter what you accomplish.
Or are you gaining? Are you gaining?
What are you gaining? Yeah,
and
that's the question.
This ability to no longer be tied down by your daily woes and your trials and your tribulations, but then to become part of the greater universe, become part of nature, part of the air, part of the aether.
I don't know. I don't know.
Another
Right?
do you remember we talked about the novel that had been channeled via the Ouija board, the Mark
Uh-huh.
Twain novel?
Right? That's
So
exactly kind of what I was thinking about as far as this cracked information coming through. That's not,
yes.
if,
So
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be a skeptic. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's not true. I'll just go ahead and accept somebody wrote a horrible book and dedicated that Mark Twain wrote it. You know what I mean? And it was a
yes.
horrible message. It
But
was
the
a very
best
diluted
part
message.
of that book is the introduction. And in that introduction, one of the best things that has always stuck with me that I loved so much is that so he says to her, something, he makes a comment about having to sort of run at the board to get to the apostrophe because it's down too far because they fashioned this spirit board, this Ouija board, they fashioned it so that it has more punctuation and contractions and things like that.
Yeah.
So everything's not spelled out so painstakingly. And he's trying to get to this apostrophe. And he makes a comment about how he's like running at the board to try and be able to push it, which totally reminds me of being in like one of those dream states where you're running and you're stuck in like, you keep running as fast as you can, but you're kind of stuck in like that watery sand pit or whatever. But
No, I
then he
got you.
says, he
Mine
says
is
it's
that I try to
crowded.
punch somebody as hard as I possibly can, and no matter what I do,
It doesn't.
it does nothing to them.
See,
My fist
everybody
just
has
bounces
different.
off like feathers, and
Everybody
they're
has
like,
a
"Are you
different
trying
thing.
to?" And they always ridicule me. Are you trying to hit me? And they laugh at me,
Oh,
and
that's
everybody
funny.
around.
For
So
me, it's
that's
just
horrible.
like trying to get somewhere, and I can't possibly move any faster than what I'm moving in the dream. But
That's
in any
horrible.
case, so he says to her, he makes a comment about how he has to get a running start, and he makes a comment in there about it being very crowded. And she said, "Oh, are there a lot of people there with you in the afterlife?" Something like that. And he says, "Oh, yes, everyone here wishes they had a scribe on earth." And I just love that idea that here he is trying to, even just as an idea of a
Awesome.
fictional idea, the idea that there are all of these kind of dead kind of crowding each other out like the waiting room in Beetlejuice, it's like, what? No, let me through. And
But
then
that would be something that
he's
you'd have to
got,
work out internally too, right? I mean, what death would be if there is one that you can create. What I really like is what dreams may come like that as well. This guy dies, and he's trying to affect the living,
yes.
and trying to affect the afterlife, and then he's finding a way to narrate his story via his brother somehow. I can't remember how, but he does it. But it's such a great story. And the book is amazing. The movie is kind of trashy, but it's Robin Williams, so you got to love it.
The other question I often wonder and have been asked and don't know the answer to is, do the dead know they're dead?
Yeah, do you know
And
you die?
do
Yeah,
the dead, and do you know that you're dead? One. And two, I mean, we know if you've nearly died because you come back to life and you
yeah.
tell people about the experience you've had. But if you've died,
Well, to think
do
about
you
that, they
know?
do
And then
say
you're haunting someone. Do you actually realize that you're a ghost? I mean, in all of our fiction stories and all of our movies, yes, they know they're ghosts, and
eventually they
they're
figure it out. There's a great movie that just came out recently. 2 points. One, NDEers say that they have to figure it out. They don't know what's happening, and they eventually realize it's them underneath them, and blah blah blah. The cliche goes
right,
from there
right,
or whatnot.
right.
And then the other part would be I forgot what the hell I was going to say. My brain is gone. Can you
Well,
get
let's see.
dementia at
You were
42
we were
years?
talking about people not knowing they were dead and sort of the idea of like
Oh, it's
ghosts
a
trying to discover. Yeah.
great movie. But again, that's the dementia. I don't know what the movie's called. So that part of the conversation is going nowhere. But it's about a guy who dies, and he's basically just got to figure out how to deal with it, right? I mean, it's a weird, melancholy type film. And I'm not going to be able to give you any other information. So
You're not thinking of the Wim Wender movie with the
they were
uh
sheets.
oh well, that sounds
Just
like
came out.
Beetlejuice.
No, it is.
Back
They
to
were.
Beetlejuice.
The guy
um
dies in a car accident, and he ends up in the hospital. And for the remainder of the film, he wears the sheet from his autopsy. And other people
oh
that he
God.
sees are also
That
wearing those
sounds
sheets.
wonderful. I mean, it sounds like a great movie.
It's a it's a great conceit. I didn't really find it interesting. I lost interest like maybe 30 minutes in. Some
Now,
interesting people.
I will tell you, I have not had I've had a lot of paranormal experiences. I have not had any near-death experience where I really thought that I was dying and had to fight my way back. Although I have that feeling constantly in dreams. I constantly am trying to fight my way in between consciousness and the dream state. But I will tell you a story of my brother-in-law who died very young, and he was diagnosed with a very, very rare heart condition. But it was so rare that it was one of those things where in September they said he had a gluten allergy. Or I'm sorry, in like March they said he had a gluten allergy, and by September he had passed away. He was 48 years old, quite young.
Wow.
And I saw him in the hospital. I believe it was the day before he passed away. And I had visited him occasionally. He'd been hospitalized several times. But this particular time, I went down to see him. And when everybody else was out of the room, this is my sister's husband, and he was raised Catholic. When everybody else was out of the room, he told me something. And I could tell he was kind of telling me because I think he knew that I would believe him. And he said that he was lying in bed and was kind of looking up toward the ceiling, and this light came down. And when the light got closer, it was actually, he said, millions of little beings, like little light beings. And he thought they were tiny little angels or something like that. And he could feel them sort of like there to take him away. And he said, please, I'm not ready yet. And he wanted to say goodbye to his wife and his daughter and his son. And they went away. They went back up into the light and disappeared. And then it was the next day that he died. And I think, and they had actually given him 2 months at that point. When he had that experience, they said he had about 2 months to live, and everybody was kind of reeling from that knowledge.
And then he dies.
He dies the next day. But I had forgotten that he told me that until like a year and a half later. And I just kind of remembered it one day and thought, oh, now it's of comfort. Now I can share this information with my sister. At the time you don't say, oh, don't worry, little tiny angels came down. That's not a helpful thing to say when somebody's lost the person that, they thought they were going to spend the rest of their lives with. So
is the single most dramatic thing that will happen to you as a human being, right? The end of your existence, whether you will know it happens in the moment or not, your brain is going to do something. A lot of people think that chemicals get released when you die. A lot of people think that when you die, whether or not your brother-in-law experienced something, I am very pessimistic. I'm very optimistic. I'm actually hopeful that when you die, something happens, right? Because, at the end of the day, I've had a lot of time to develop who I am and would like to continue developing who I am. You know what I mean? It was good being a baby and learning how to walk and eventually learning how to write a novel or whatnot. Is there more out there? Are we an egg? Are we a cocoon? Can we become something more? But
that is the forever question. And the other side of that is, what would you do if somebody told you had 2 months to live? Or that's the whole idea of the bucket list, right? It's the list of things that you will do before you kick the bucket.
The doctor's going to tell you one day, he's going to say, Varla, man, I'm so sorry, something's wrong, it's not going to work out, I can't do anything.
Maybe. Or it could just come suddenly and unexpectedly.
You might not know, because some people say they get into an accident with a car and they should have died and they did not, and they don't remember it. So, you might not even know the trauma is occurring around you.
Right.
Like, unfortunately, I have a bad habit. I go on a subreddit that allows me to watch videos of people who have died. I'm morbidly curious just to see the way the body reacts to the actual moment of death. And that's a really great place to look at it. It's horrible to admit. I guess I feel bad saying it, but it's very curious. It's not a human being really that you would know. It's not a thing that is animated and has feelings. It looks less filth. You know what I mean? I've been to funerals and looked in coffins. It does look like a shell. Something is gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just we don't.
Does that cheapen life? I just wondered if does that cheapen life? If you put something more valuable inside humans that gets released upon death, does that cheapen what you are? Do you want to be something more special now? Are you trading away your value as a human being or as a species or as a being by wanting to be something more?
Or is that the very thing that has allowed us to create everything around us?
Because it's symbolic everywhere, right? You see it in nature, you see it in our art, you see it in the way that we conversate with each other. There is a yin to the yang. There is a life and something. What? Death? Is that the difference? Or is there something else beyond that? Is that the separating line? Is that the birth? Or is that the thing? I mean, it's hard to say. Is that the noun end of the sentence? Or is that just a verb? Because I mean, that's how we start this conversation.
I've been next to a birthing bed, and I've been next to a deathbed, and there's some similarities. You know, I've held the hand of somebody giving birth, and I've held the hand of somebody dying, and there are unmistakable similarities in the shift in the perception of time, and the sound of the breath, and the rhythmic.
My children took so long
moment that happens.
From little tiny seeds, man, they became these things. They were fighting with each other in the womb. You know what I mean? I could feel them. We listened to their hearts beating. They were things always that existed in my wife. And those things existed in her mother and beyond. They always existed. They never
Yes, and when you met them, didn't you have this unmistakable feeling like they made perfect sense, and yet they were strangers, and yet you knew them?
It scared the shit out of me. I wanted them to live so bad. I wanted them to live so bad. I don't want them to do anything but live. I yell at them and get mad at them only because I want them to live. I didn't understand what it meant when somebody said their father was scared, and I am scared shitless of death involving my children and having to witness it and suffering, and I don't want them to suffer, and that's what went through my mind. And it is one of the worst tortures I've ever felt in my life. Really honestly is. Loving somebody that much hurts worse.
Oh yes.
Than anything if I knew it was going to hurt that bad.
Not sleep. There is no sleep. And even when they're older and they're so-called sleeping through the night, you'll still peek in their room and make sure you hear the sound of their breath. You know, that will never go away. You'll never be able to. You know,
I know that they're healthy. Man, those guys are so ornery. I know they'll live. I just don't want them to kill themselves by doing something incredibly dumb. That's I'm just watching them do dumb stuff all the time. They're the most healthy things I've ever seen in my life. They sleep. I'm like, thank you. Stay there. You're going to be okay. I lock the gate. I walk away. I'm good. But it's when they're awake, it scares the crap out of me.
Lock the gate and I walk away.
Parenthood has been an experience, but you're absolutely right, though. People do talk about that birth versus death thing. You came from nothing.
There's a movement now. Have you heard of a death doula? It's not a new thing, but it's sort of starting to take.
Let me add this. I don't know what a death doula is, but do they administer psychedelics when you die?
No.
Is that something they can do? Because that is something I'm incredibly interested in.
They're death coach. I don't know. Maybe some death doulas do, but just as a doula, a birth doula, is somebody who is there, somewhat like a midwife, but more to kind of help the process move along, keep the person, mentally and spiritually on track, and give them fortitude and water, and just basically act as a coach, as someone to kind of cheer you along. It's very difficult to give birth. It does things to your body that you didn't know your body could do or should do and could never do again. So you need a support team.
It's very true. You need to be prepared. And it's unfortunate that sometimes it does happen by surprise. I don't think that's you say stupid things like this, I'll say it anyway. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to happen. I think you are supposed to deteriorate over a lifetime, and just your body eventually just die. And if you die young, it's very painful. It's always very, very bad when you die young. And I think if you're going to have a bad death, if you're going to have a bad life, you're going to stick around a long time, and you might cause problems. You know what I mean? You might be able to interact, right? In terms of fantasy, I don't know for sure. Just saying, you need a good death and a doula.
Well, so a doula, essentially a death doula, and you could become trained. And a lot of, you asked about the psychedelics, but this is more in a line with perhaps like an herbalist. In fact, there's an herbal conference near me in the spring, and one of the special trainings you can do is to work and become a certified death doula. And it's the idea that death is sacred and that we treat it like this thing that we're afraid of, and it's then treated very clinically. And there's quite a rise in sort of death rights and
good thing, though, right? You want to be treated clinically at the end of your life. I'm always constantly thinking about what death feels like, and you're not going to be breathing. And breathing is really important, not the feeling pain. I would imagine that alone, I would want to feel as much clinical.
Not to say that you aren't.
It's possible.
I don't mean to say clinical in terms of medical, like whether or not you're given enough morphine to take your pain away or anything like that, and not to say that you don't need a nurse as well. Many doulas, many birth doulas work in hospitals alongside nurses and doctors. But it's the idea that you can kind of take back your own death. And I think as we have many people who know they're going to die because they've been diagnosed with cancer, and in an extraordinary example, about 20 years ago, my mother's best friend passed away. And this was sort of in the early stages of women learning more about, she had breast cancer and she didn't get the treatment, and the treatment didn't take. And it was kind of, one of the first people I knew. But she knew she was dying, and she and her friends decorated her own coffin.
Interesting.
And that is the first I'd ever heard of somebody being so knowing death was coming, looking it right in the eye and saying, fine, it's my death. I want it to be beautiful. This is how I want it to be. These are the candles I want lit. And it much in that way, like a woman prepares for her birth. It's like, I want this kind of music. These are the people who are allowed in and out of the room.
Some people think you should prepare responsibly for your death like that.
Yes, and that's part of there's a movement with death and sort of taking back death, and actually a lot of, because now the quote unquote younger generation, and by younger generation I mean like people in my age in their 40s and such, that are now taking over a lot of the industries. Like now they're becoming the funeral directors, they're becoming the morticians and the kind of the core staff. And there is a movement among people to kind of own that death in a new way, so that yes, we're not saying it's not painful. You can know that somebody's going to die. They could be 102 years old and they're going to die. And that doesn't change the fact that you are sad and you miss them and they're not coming back. I mean, that part of grief you can't prepare for. You just can't. But you can change the cultural attitude toward death and our approach to how we view death, and take a more sacred approach to it, and own that death in a more beautiful way, and understand that it is part of the natural cycle, just as birth.
Unfortunately, I think I realized that way early in the marriage, with my wife. I was laying in bed with her, and I realized one day one of us were going to wake up and the other one was going to be dead, and we're going to have to deal with that if we stay married to that point. There is a point where that person will no longer be there, or I will no longer be there for her, and my part of this bargain will be vacant. No matter how hard I work, nothing will probably prepare her for that absolutely, monumentous occasion. She'll be alive doing what I used to do, whatever I do.
And I think that
she didn't like hearing that. She got very upset that I mentioned. She got very upset that I mentioned. She'd be very upset if I mentioned that. She won't listen anyway, so it's okay. But she got very upset that I said that to her. She couldn't really deal with that as a statement to talk about.
Well, she's just kind of like, oh, Bryan, I roll.
Who the hell did I marry, man? Can't we just enjoy the morning? Why do I have to have that on my mind?
I haven't even had my coffee yet.
Right.
You got to have a crisis, an existential crisis before 8 a.m.
I guess it's just ongoing, right? Because I constantly think about that fact. I mean, if you look at, I think they call it balancing on the razor's edge, or looking at the abyss when you're standing on the edge of a building, realizing there's death right there. All you have to be is not in the right.
I think that that brings us back to the very beginning of the conversation, in which we kind of talked about that
the verb
realization that changed our DNA. That realization of the nothingness when somebody died, and that
Did Lucy know
began.
When Lucy, our common ancestor, climbed that tree to get that piece of fruit and fell out, did she know how dangerous that was? And as she was falling out, bouncing off each branch on her way to the ground to be eaten by scavengers, or probably buried by something so we can find her later on, did she know that she was going to lose everything? Was she desperately afraid? Was she scared and crawling towards safety? What happened?
No, she just fell, right? Because you thought you were that prior to that, there had to have been this fearlessness, because there was nothing to lose. Yeah. And as we became more attached and more civilized, we began to develop more fear and more capable
of defending ourselves. So if we lost, it was more our fault, as opposed to just, oh well, it was my turn.
And it was also the thing that you talked about. It's not, is it the fear that you're going to lose this person, or is it that you're staring your own immortality in the face, or your own mortality, in the face, and therefore you are driven to make your mark. So now you're going to calculate and map and paint and write and sing and do all of these things to say, I was here. In 300 years, you will know I was here.
Depending, right? Also, even on a smaller scale, say me and my wife, for example, I die tomorrow. She has the burden of everything that I did. It's going to wear her down. Not only the emotional depression of having lost me or whatnot, she potentially is going to lose her life too, earlier than potentially if I hadn't died. You know what I mean? She's weakened because I died. She's no longer as fit as she was. She's not going to probably procreate again or whatnot. Too late.
No, this is not. Don't let her hear this one. This is not a good.
But that's what happens, isn't it?
Out of context, that
all the stuff that I do for her won't be there anymore. So I saw it with my grandparents when he died.
Yeah.
She died immediately after.
You do see that. Yes, you see people who are, have spent their lives together die within a shorter period of time.
Right? A year or two. Not saying it's the same every time.
No. And of course, it's different for everybody. And some people thrive after their spouse passes. It's all in the fortitude of the person and the ability to, separate themselves. The longevity
of the relationship, I think, matters the most. 42-year-olds tend to rebound faster than 83-year-olds. You know what I mean? But still, that person is not going to be the same as they were before. They're going to be fundamentally.
No, and we never are, right? Like the people that we've lost and the experience are part of those scars on our body. That's part of the experience that we have in life, and what shapes our views. The not only the people who their influence on us when they're alive, but the loss of them and what that means culturally or personally.
And that's the job of these spiritual leaders too, isn't it? Priests, monks.
This
medicine man that I wrote into this story, I'm thinking of him as a guide for the living to appreciate the chaos of death, or the emptiness of death.
There's that doula. That's the doula.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking that chaos and sort of moving through that madness.
Yeah. I'm desperate to work for a hospice at the VA over
That's
here.
That is a place that the doulas are more and more common. Hospice is the hospice nurses essentially are doulas in many ways. And I have had a couple of friends cared so beautifully by hospice. And they know you're not going to suddenly get better. You're not necessarily going to get, okay, I'm just got to get through this treatment. They know it's the end of your life, and there are still things that must be done in order to maintain, the basic human functions, and also to provide comfort to the patient and comfort to the family. And it's I think it's one thing to be a nurse and treat people. I think nursing is amazing. And I had a wonderful, the best hospital stay I could hope for this summer when I had surgery. It was kind of an emergency surgery, and it was the way that I was treated. I mean, it was just, it gave me this newfound respect for that profession. It's another level, I think, to know that you are treating people that you will have to say goodbye to in a week's time or a day's time or a month's time. And you're making their last days, something worth living and with comfort and with love and with grace, and allowing people to have dignity and grace as they lose their faculties. And that's exceptional.
And there's a reality to it though too, right? I mean, you can only be so cuddly in that kind of position. I mean, you're not, like you said, fixing anything. You're not going to make anything better. No. I had one experience.
You're crying in the closet. You're not crying in front of anyone if you're crying at all.
Exactly. But I mean, I had one experience with hospice and watched somebody die in a hospital bed, and the hospice nurse was very frank. She's like, this is what can happen, and it's up to you how long you wait. Anything beyond that, you could potentially consider suffering. You know what I mean? I mean, it was very frank. It was, granted, It was New Jersey. Maybe it was a regional thing. Basically, maybe that was the hospice equivalent of middle finger out the window as we're driving. I don't know. You don't know in this area. People are horrible, but that's exactly what happened. And we made the decision based on what she said. It was better, for whatever, to do what we did. And we did it because what the nurse said. She helped us make the decision on the death of whatever.
Yes. Oh no, I think there is a certain frankness. When my father-in-law was passing away, they were very frank with us. They said, here are 3 things that we find comfort people at the end of their life. And it was like, whoa.
What were those 3 things?
Tell them that you love them. Oh, absolutely. I remember. To tell them that you love them. To, ask their forgiveness if you need to ask their forgiveness for something, or to tell them that you forgive them if there's something that you need to forgive them for.
That'd be painful if they told me something they forgive me for that I didn't think they were really that mad about.
I know, right? Like,
yo, dude, you know that thing?
It's not big of a deal.
I'm the person that gave you cancer.
You're still holding on to that?
I gave you Thorazine this entire time, hoping you would die. But I'm real sorry about that. But I really just could never get over that thing you did to me. But anyway, have a good death.
Have a good death. See ya.
You're a dick. I hate you. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Anyway, I mean, that's horrible. I think about Saddam Hussein, right? That was highly publicized. I mean, it went viral, his death. I don't know if you saw the video or not.
No, I wouldn't watch that. But.
Okay, it's a horribly morbid thing. I did see it, and at the end of his life, he was ridiculed and insulted culturally in his native religion. And do you want me to tell you, the gain weight dropped, and as he's dying, this is happening. And I just wondered what that would do. I mean, you're talking about the death doula. Does that guy, he deserves that kind of death though, doesn't he?
I don't know. I mean, you have the same, by no means defending him, but I think of the witches who were set on fire or hung to the jeers of, the peasants throwing rotten fruit at them and mocking them for doing nothing more than trying to, heal a young child and being unsuccessful, or owning more land than the richest man in town. And I think of those jeers and those things. And I think when you meet your own death, it's really, it's between you and death. And what anybody else around you says, it might provide comfort, it might not provide comfort. I mean, I just think of that. I think of those public hangings. And always somebody's going to think they're right, and always somebody is going to think they're wrong. And somebody's always going to be there to throw a rotten tomato at your head. There's always critics, right? So
what about forcing the decision, like in 9/11? forcing those people to dive to their deaths as opposed to burning alive or choking to death or whatnot. What does that kind of do with the last little bit? I mean,
yeah. And what happened? Like, does the spirit of somebody who undergoes something like that,
something
like,
traumatic, how do they heal after death? If there's an
yeah,
afterlife,
is that trauma just absorbed by the greater world? I mean, certainly we all still feel that trauma in our daily lives. We feel it every time we go to the airport. We feel it every time we, look at the downtown skyline. I mean, there's a trauma there that is absorbed. What happened to them, we won't know. But is it different? Is death different if you are 98 years old and you've lived a long and good life? Is it a different death that comes for you than the death that takes you from, a plane like that? I mean, are those different?
She was like a wet tissue. She wanted death so bad. Now she did was sit there and stare out the window. She had no life whatsoever. She wore Depends and shit herself all the time, and I don't think she even realized she did it. And when I talked to her, she wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anything. She had cataract. She was looking through film. She couldn't cook. She couldn't move. I don't even know if she could think. She couldn't talk. Her mouth was nothing but plastic and, ulcers. A 100-year-old woman. How happy was this person to still be existing? I've never seen an old person that I envied. Right? I've never seen an 80-year-old to go, fuck, that dude's living large. I can't wait. I'm always gone, damn, this is going to suck. This is going to suck. It's going to suck at the end, no matter what. This is going to suck. And there's no way to avoid it. It's going to suck if somebody takes a 2x4 to the back of my head, or it's going to suck if I'm laying in a hospital bed on a ventilator because I smoked for 14 or 15 years, Not going to be pleasant.
Well, I've met a few old people that I've admired. My great uncle Henry.
I mean, you're not going. I'm going to want to be that dude.
He was in pretty good shape, and I thought, there's something that comes with it. He had this attitude of like, I don't give a damn. Like I'm 80. I don't give a damn, and it's something that I think I
do it until you
try
can't,
and adapt into my daily life at 40 years younger.
I mean, what did he do? What was his thing?
Oh, he was a working man. He was a blue collar man. He worked in
so he had no choice. It was that or die.
He was an he worked in an aluminum plant under, in the south of Texas. A lot of heat.
And then you have this mentality, right? Where then you're not a man if you're not doing that. Even if you have $1 million stocked in the bank.
I think he just had a certain fortitude that comes from, growing up on a farm, having hard labor, and knowing that at the end of the day, when you sit down to rest, you rest. You don't pace the halls wondering about whether or not, you've done the right thing in your life. I mean, he, of course, toward the later part of his life, he would say things to me occasionally, like, there are things that I regret. Namely, there was an estranged sister who had been institutionalized that everybody sort of cloistered away and never talked about. And so that was one of the things that we talked about, because when I found out there had been an estranged sister institutionalized, naturally I jumped all over that. I was like, what? I need to know more. Tell me everything. There wasn't a lot to tell, because she had been
they didn't want to know,
different era.
The only person that knew that information were the ones that were close enough to actually see it and care about it. She cared. The person that was institutionalized. Everybody else didn't want to know. That's why she was institutionalized. She wanted to keep it secret. I mean,
yes. Well, I don't know why she was institutionalized. She could have done something as well. That's unspoken. She could have gone on a murderous rampage for all we know and burned a barn down. I'm telling you, this is the kind of story. That's where I get my fodder for my stories.
Animals. We're absolutely animals. Our cruelest intentions come from that lizard brain or whatever we are. Yeah. Whatever made us live in caves, seeking shelter, building fires to keep the scary things away, and killing our neighbors if they want to take our cave away from us. I mean, that's why we do what we do, and we do really bad things to each other. Build walls, steal children.
Yep. Yeah.
Have orange skin.
Yeah. Do horrible things to Eat fast food.
Oh my God, man, that photo. I don't know your political stance. I mean, I assume California, you're a staunch right wing Republican.
Obviously, yeah.
Obviously, San Francisco. I bet your opinions are down with homosexuality and abortion and all that stuff. But God Almighty, that picture of the hamburgers, that was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen my nation do.
It took me so long to understand what I was seeing.
Is it real? This is real. This is not fucking real. What the hell is this bullshit?
Seriously, I thought it was an Onion headline.
I know.
But I think that every day. I think, you know what,
Varla?
Are we reading the Onion?
I'm so happy. I'm so happy that this is happening because I do believe that George Bush showed us how powerful our president is. And this doofus is showing us again that if we continue to allow our president to have this much power, we're the stupidest assholes on the fucking planet. And I guess we are, because we really don't have any power to say whether he has power or not at this stage, I don't think.
Well, I do think that the optimist in me says this is shaking people out of their apathy, saying everything was fine, because everything was not fine. But we had this attitude that it was because we weren't personally being threatened somehow. And now people are seeing that, it's the whole adage, first they came for
something. What should we be doing? I mean, should we yell and scream and get on Twitter? I mean, that's like, yeah,
that's what he does.
Exactly.
You meet him at his level.
Nobody even cares. I mean, this guy makes so much noise and he's done so much wrong that he doesn't matter what he does anymore. But what do you do? I mean, obviously this is happening. You, meaning us, what do you do? Like, do you take to the streets and burn down CVS, or do you like run for office like that Alexandra Cortez lady?
I mean, I think everybody does it differently, but I think, you start by just being, doing the right thing a little bit at a time. So you make decisions that aren't based on fear. You don't, act like people that aren't the same as you are ignorant and aren't as good as you. You try and make choices every day to be a more compassionate and open person. I mean, that's how you can do on a minute level, and then I think it radiates out from there in terms of activism or whatever means.
You have to acknowledge mistakes too, right? I mean, you have to acknowledge that Donald Trump was a mistake. I didn't vote for him. Probably you either, or a lot of other people in this country. Majority.
Oh, hell no, I didn't vote for him.
The majority didn't vote for him, and yet he's there, and he's teaching us a mistake, and that mistake is potentially eternal life, isn't it? It's that satellite in the Kuiper belt. It's that thing going forever, and it'll have Donald Trump's DNA in it, and it'll have your vote in it, and it'll have my service in the United States military in it, because we put some effort into it and we made some kind of subtle difference. At the end of the day, I mean, what is life? Life is this grinding thing that you do for your children so they can stand behind you and enjoy fucking Paw Patrol.
Oh, the show about nothing but good deeds.
I swear to God, I can't.
I know. It's probably one of the more vapid shows. It's harmless in many ways,
They love it so much.
And they love it so much. I'm telling you, we just got out of that stage in my house. We're beyond that stage at last. And there's a few remnants here and there of little things, but they finally stopped pretending that they were, pups on the lookout.
Well, they're 3.5, so I figured we got another year and a half or that.
Oh, honey, it's going to be at least 2 more years.
It's cute. I like it. My daughter especially. She likes Owlette. I don't know what that one is, though. What is that one? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know, but I just read this hilarious. This is totally not on topic at all, but I just read this hilarious article about following the Sesame Street characters on Twitter.
Uh-huh.
Including, you can follow, Oscar the Grouch and Cookie Monster, who is constantly saying, "Me want to eat me phone. Now it looks like a cookie," and just hilarious stuff like that. I thought, that's kind of how you get through it sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You
find a way to laugh,
the way a kid looks at things, and you raise good individuals who are,
You look for answers. I mean, you look for somebody who wants to spend time staring into the abyss so that you don't have to. We talked about that fantasy, right? About Reverend Bob painting a picture of his afterlife so that you get on board.
Right.
As an author, that's what you're doing too,
right?
You're
Right.
creating
Sure.
it
And
for
then there's people who are just like, yeah, okay, sounds
sign
good.
up,
You know, I don't really
$1.
feel like fighting
I don't want to
or
do anything.
working it out for myself.
I'm
I'm
tired,
good
dude.
with
This
that.
sucks. I'm not
Yeah.
very good at it. I'm not very smart. I don't have the DNA to do what I need to do. Or I got beat as a kid or whatever. There's lots of excuses why people don't do it, I guess. But they still need it. They need an excuse to keep going because there's
Yeah, they
something
need
better.
it.
Something
Yep.
better. That's what death is, right? Something better, not necessarily something bad, unless you do bad. Depending on
I
what
mean,
culture you're
I
going
don't know.
to.
You can look at like the feudal system in many ways as sort of a greater analogy for
Which,
that, right? You had the king who supposedly had all the answers, but the king had his council, and he
oh,
had to make his decisions based on the council, and that council had its own biases and ideas. And you had, you know, the Church of England, and you had the wild pagans, and you had the
I gotta.
witches out there getting persecuted, and all, it's just this whole dynamic, and everybody had their kind of different roles, and by and large people are followers because they don't want to put themselves out there and be the one to make the decision, because you get all the shit if you make the decision if it doesn't go well, right?
You have a hard time going far back in time looking at lineages of our royalty. And I did one day, I got bored. This is what I do for fun. I got bored and I decided to find out who Prince Philip's related to. I did my 23andMe, so I have a Paplab group, and I'm like really disappointed that it's so remote. I can't find anybody that's related to me. But this dude, I wanted to find out where his parentage came from, so I followed back his dad's as far as I possibly could. And I ran into the most interesting thing. He hails from the family of Odin. Odin. I go back all this way to the family of Odin, Norse god of
The
whatever.
Norse god of everything.
I mean,
Battle.
just the fucking jaw dropped. I mean, I had to go back
Oh,
to Earl,
you're a
fucking like
Viking.
the 11th century or something. I mean, I had to really, really go back far, following dads all the way back, and I found he's part of this Odin clan. And then I clicked on it, and there's like nothing. I mean, maybe it could have been planted. Maybe, obviously, it's not hard to go back 80 clicks into some dude's family and put clan of Odin. But it's fascinating, isn't
It
it?
is
That
fascinating. And it is
eventually this
fascinating
guy
when
was
you
deified and he had
did
an
it come
answer
with
to
like a
death.
map when you were looking at your DNA? Did it come with the map so that you can kind of see like when and where? And because I
Yeah,
find that kind of thing completely fascinating. Like,
obviously
what was the landscape of the environment that made these people
yeah,
leave everything they had and get on a boat and, take it out across the sea, even if
Europe
it
is
was only,
incredibly flat.
a small sea?
I mean, it was so easy to move in Europe. So when my ancestors came out of Africa, they got to go wherever they wanted to go very easily after the Ice Age ended. And your ancestors probably too, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
have a vowel at the end of your name, so you're probably European.
Yep. Most of me, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the best part about it is there's so much in the DNA that you don't expect. I mean, 0.06 Native American. I mean, what's Elizabeth Warren? Isn't she like even higher than that? She's like full on Native
Yeah,
American.
I
Like
forget what the actual percentage was. I just know she took the test.
Democrats are the bunch of dumbest people I've ever met in my
Why'd she
life.
take that test? She should have just been like, fuck you.
Right? I mean, I just don't
Stop being a
understand.
racist pig. That's what
We
she
have this
should have done.
person, this really bad president. You would think they would galvanize, right? They would say, we're putting all our energies behind the best possible candidate. And now there's like this field of like 50 people that are going to
I
be
know.
debating in a
But
second.
I'll think they have the
I'm
answer.
the best. I'm
Oh,
the
it'll
best.
be
You
the
listen to me.
undoing, right? That will be
Yeah,
the
exactly.
undoing.
We got Donald
It's,
Trump from that last time. I
I
wonder what
know.
shit will
I
come to
know.
the surface this time.
I know.
It's crazy, man. I don't know. We're not even talking. We can talk about death all day.
Well,
And I,
this will all lead to death at some point, right?
exactly. We'll both die on this hangout together.
I'll be your death doula, man.
Talk me through it, Varla, please. Where do you think? I mean, I desperately want to get you back on the show. I don't know when I'll get this back. I don't know when I'll get this on the air. You know how horrible I am.
Well, let's see.
But what's the natural course of conversation from here?
Last year around February, we talked about like Saint
Valentine's Day.
Valentine and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think we should do something different. And then did we do like a March kind of Irishy thing? There's
Nope.
always that. I don't know. You just think about it and let me know what topic you'd like to talk about. We can continue talking about death. We can talk about.
I think it's got to be death. I think that no matter what, because we're going back and we're talking about religious movements.
Yes, and I always end up talking about like ghosts at some point because that's kind of my thing. And that is, of course,
natural, in my opinion, and whether or not you agree. I mean, you agree. You talk about supernatural. You have to embrace the afterlife in a little bit of ways.
Oh yeah.
And I like that. And this is desperately what I want on the show, is to talk about this kind of subject matter and get into it, because that's why people are motivated by this. That's why people do what they do, is to avoid death or to have answers.
Yeah, to avoid death, or to even if it's that's what I think, is that for many of us, it is not conscious. We are not consciously saying, "Hey, let's go avoid death today." I mean, we're not going out to battle in this moment, right? Now, there are times in your life where you may be facing that kind of situation. And there are people who constantly contemplate this type of thing. But by and large, when you're making yourself a cup of coffee and you're deciding to turn the stove off, you're not thinking, ha, defy death again. You're just sort of, okay, I remember to turn the stove off. Yay me. And I have coffee. Yay me.
Is avoid death, turn off stove. Avoid death, drink coffee.
Right. So it's this subconscious thing. It's like avoid death, put car in park, avoid death, make sure you don't slip on the ice or fall in a hole, or whatever things we keep.
Don't put that guy off in the car next to you because he might have a gun.
I have actually something that I think we could talk about that sort of relates to this, and it doesn't really have much to do with any of the topics that I write about, other than it just is an experience of mine. And it's kind of, I don't know how you'd feel about this, but I think it's maybe a little bit more about trauma and the process of like after trauma. And, I've had a few kind of major accidents in my life, but most recently, I had this fall that resulted in this long, debilitating hospitalization and all of this stuff. And that gave me a lot of time to contemplate that fragility.
It's a fascinating subject. I think it's really great. Trauma in writing, why you write trauma.
Yes. Trauma and what writing through trauma can get you. And
exactly what other people.
I worked with this wonderful woman years ago who taught me that we are all very different in our trauma, but we are all the same in our like post-traumatic stress. So we have the same symptoms, we just have different trauma backgrounds. And it was very eye-opening for me because it allowed me to get through some post-traumatic stress using some of the tools that are used for, soldiers coming back from war, or somebody
if they go to VA, they're not getting anything. They're getting SSRIs. They're getting absolutely shit on if they come back from war and they go to the VA. I will 100% guarantee the federal government is doing nothing but harming people.
My dad is a Vietnam veteran, and he didn't start being part of a post-traumatic stress disorder group, a PTSD group, until 40 years after he was back from war.
Yeah.
So
groups help. Listening to people talk. I'm really interested in MDMA talk therapy. I think that is really, really mind-blowingly interesting. And I'm a really big supporter of ketamine infusion therapies too, because that supposedly loosens up.
I do know somebody that recently did. Well, that new Michael Pollan book about it's actually about taking hallucinogenic drugs.
Oh yeah. Thank you for reminding me. I
can't even remember what it's called, but a friend of mine told me about it because he did it. He actually did it. He found a guy, I won't say where, and he found a licensed therapist, and he
the
whole
MDMA
thing. What's that?
MDMA therapy?
No, he did. He chose. I think he did mushrooms.
Ayahuasca or the shrooms. Have you ever? Well, I don't ask you if you want to incriminate yourself, but I've never done anything.
I've done it all, Bryan.
Okay,
I've done one of everything, except for the new things.
If you had
haven't done
gotten
any of the new
offended, I would have been
things.
so disappointed. I just assumed, honestly. You've done,
Yeah.
have you gone to?
I've done. There's a lot of new things that I haven't tried because those days are long behind me. But in my youth, I did at least everything once.
I'm very interested. I've only done acid and ecstasy is definitely not the best in the context that I was using it. But acid's interesting because it really lets you dig deep into your subconscious, right? I mean, it lets thoughts come up. I had one thought that has persisted from the time I was a teenager through probably the rest of my life, right? I mean, just it's very interesting how it can affect your thinking.
Yep. Yeah, it can do permanent damage or permanent enlightenment,
Which is
but it's
all,
permanent
it's how you
nonetheless.
accept that, right? I mean, something could come to the surface during a trip that you're not going to appreciate, and it could really set you down the wrong path if you're not going to accept it. So you need somebody to hold your hand kind of through the process if you're not capable of doing
Well,
some
those
really deep
kinds of
thinking.
things, yeah, or were used for sort
Mind
of
control.
well, yes, but
Yeah.
traditionally hallucinogens were used in order to actually transition from this world into the next and or the other or the world of the gods and find enlightenment and protection and answers to should we go to war or should we move or whatever, how do we heal this person? And that was the conduit, and it was used medicinally and spiritually, not recreationally by a bunch of kids hanging out in a hippie hill in Golden Gate Park, which is kind of how it's used for today. So
Yeah,
it's
more,
hard to
more,
find
more recreational.
enlightenment in a dumpster. It's like, okay, this is. But
But
that's a
if you
topic
really
for
think
another
about it,
day.
though, the character that I wrote in this story is a medicine man. I mean, I did a little bit of research, just slightly, not a lot, but I assumed he would do it to think about what he's doing for his people, even
Yeah,
at the advanced
sure.
age that I put him. He would take shrooms and spend the night staring at the stars and think about what death means. As he's communing, I actually put spirits in this story, so there's actual things like that. So he would be able to think about it and whatever. But if you had it, you'd be able to use it whenever you want. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want to do a ceremony, but there would become some kind of ceremony that went along with it. Regardless, if you've done drugs, there's some kind of process that goes to all drug use that
Right.
becomes kind of ceremonial.
Yes.
It's a called
Yes.
ritual.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's it.
That
That's a
is
great subject matter.
that is, and I think that's all kind of related. The use of because I think that people also self-medicate trying to escape trauma, right? That's how we become alcoholics.
It's
We're
very
just
interesting that you say escape too, because I mean that's not confronting it, it's not making it better. And I've seen visualizations that make addiction look very interestingly difficult to fix once you have it. You take
yeah,
one of the drugs,
that's
it
something
feels so good,
nipping
right?
at your heels
Right? But you
forever.
take something, it feels so good. It's bright and shiny and it's great for a long time until it's not.
Yep.
And then you can never get that bright and shiny back. But then nothing is even close to bright and shiny. So you still have to use the drug, even get to halfway to normal.
Yes,
Eventually,
and it's one of those things too where I think it gets away from you. So, every once in a while becomes, every other day becomes often every day.
yeah,
It just
exactly. And you're just struggling to make it feel better long enough to make it worth it. But it's always worth it, right? Isn't that's the nature of addiction? At the end of the day, it's better to close your eyes and basically just walk through life blind and not worry about it, because if you eat a McDonald's hamburger, you're going to realize McDonald's hamburgers are good. You're going to want to eat another McDonald's hamburger.
then yeah, sure.
And
It's
if
like
you eat a
opening the bag of chips. Just
exactly,
don't open it and
don't
you'll be
open it.
okay.
But then you
Pandora's
die
box.
anyway because you're miserable. I mean, what are you going to do? You have to have some kind of enjoyment. And yeah, it does diminish over time because you diminish over time. You eventually husk out because that's what happens in life. You can't keep enjoying the experience because your experience changes. So you have to find
You
different
can
ways to
keep it.
experience it.
You have to find a new experience. You can't. Well, I mean, I don't know. Some people do. They do the same
Right?
thing
I
every day
guess
for their whole lives. They eat
you have
a
one
certain
good
kind of
thought
fish, or
and you just have that one good thought. You never add to it and that's it. Or you have a thought and you constantly tinker with it and make it a better thought. And eventually it becomes two thoughts. And eventually you're playing with 19 thoughts or whatever. I mean, you're just constantly playing with that original thought and making it different and better. So one day it might be psychedelics, or it might be religion, right? Or religion and then moves to psychedelics. I mean, these are things that are constantly evolving to give you an answer. And the question is, why does it matter? Right? I mean, I guess for me, at the end of the day, why are we doing this to ourselves? That thing, I never even mentioned the word this entire time that we talk consciousness. Why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we care so much to have an answer as to what we are and why we're doing what we're doing? Is it just survival?
It's survival, perhaps based on an innate fear of the unknown, and this desire to conquer that unknown.
So we just fear death to survive.
Civilizations are made. I mean, that's the whole. I mean, that could well be that we're basically just afraid of death, and that's how civilizations are made.
Does death prevent you from surviving?
And the only way to survive is to, continue to create, to discover, to move on, so that even if your body dies, your mind and your thoughts continue to exist because you contributed to something.
When my kids were born, my existential crisis revved up like big time. I could not stop thinking about my demise and how it would affect my family. The disappearance of me. I just could not stop thinking about what death would feel like in the moment that it occurred. You know what I mean? Horrible, horrible thoughts. But when I would try to share it with my wife, and she says, "Why are you having those now? You should have had all those thoughts when you were 14 years old. You should be done with it now. What is wrong with you?"
I like your wife.
She's a hardcore person. She doesn't pull punches, and she doesn't take my shit at all. As much as I want her to, she's the only person that does not take my shit. It's horrible. It's why my voice is like this, because I'm trying to give her shit, and she doesn't want to take it.
So come on, man. I'll take your voice instead.
She does every time. She wins, I lose, and it's like the dumbest thing ever. But anyway, she said, "Don't. You should already been doing this. Grow up a little bit. Think about other things."